It's Mitzi and Mike, and this is the Wave Social Podcast powered by Arcade Studios, a show for marketers, creators, brand builders, and anyone else who's trying to make waves online.
We sit down with the experts and tastemakers behind today's up-and-coming brands, and today on the show we have multidisciplinary designer and art director and futurist Alyssa Yuhas. That was a mouthful.
Yeah, futurist is cool though.
I know, I snuck that in there. You like that?
Yeah, I do.
Thank you. I'm a copywriter now. This was a good one. We're getting towards the end, so
Yes.
This is like the final countdown to the end of the season. It just keeps on getting bigger and better.
Feels like the final countdown to the end of my pregnancy too.
Yes,
Just a
you're
few
about to
weeks
pop.
away.
That's for sure.
I was at the doctor's today, and I was explaining all the things that feel weird about my body, and she's like, "Yeah, this is a point where the wheels start to fall off, so that's pretty normal."
Yeah, just hold on as tight as you can. But yeah, what else is going on? I guess this has been a longer season than past seasons. We've just been trying to stretch it out, mostly because we're trying to get ready to go weekly in the new year.
Right. So we decided that starting the new year, when I'm back from mat leave, we'll start recording again and hopefully be publishing these on a weekly basis.
Yeah, we're getting around that 50 episode mark, so we feel like we have our legs under us. We got a great team, and recently we got another award nomination.
We were nominated for Best Outstanding
Business Series in the Canadian Podcast Awards. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we don't do it for awards, but I mean, it's a nice little icing on the cake, you know?
Yeah, I like it.
Cool. Should we get into Alyssa's bio?
Yeah, but before we do, I wanted to talk about how she's working with us. So we've had Alyssa on the show before. You can go back. I can't remember exactly what episode it was, but
Season 3, episode 4, I think.
good memory.
Yes.
So we talked to her before about creativity, and then a few months ago, I'd say earlier this year, we started talking, you and I, about the need to have a creative director on our team. And it's a role we've never had before. We've never worked with a creative director before. So we started to just reach out to people that we respect in the industry who are much more experienced than we are and could kind of give us some advice on it. And Alyssa was one of those people. And so we reached out to her and jumped on a call. And then halfway through the call, we were talking about what we think would be a good fit and asking her what she thinks would be a good fit. And then she was like, should we just talk? And then we were so shocked and stunned because we wouldn't have ever thought that she would have the space for it, but also be willing to work with us.
Yeah. But when she said it, it was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I think it wasn't just a matter of us not knowing what a creative director was or what role they'd play in our company, but just because our agency is really different than the more traditional agency style and structure. It's very content driven and very focused on social and digital channels. So it wouldn't work with just any creative director, but Alyssa's not just any creative director. She just has been the perfect fit for us and slid right into our team really naturally. So it was fun for us to have this follow-up conversation to our last interview that we had with her in season 3 with this new relationship that we've got.
Yeah. So she's been working with us for the last, I guess, few months. It's been so fun.
Yeah. So Alyssa, to give some context, is an experienced art director and designer. She's got a demonstrated history of working and consulting in the design industry. She's been recognized with a lot of design awards over the 10 plus years that she's been working in the space. And she's currently studying her Master's of Design in Strategic Foresight and Innovation at OCAD University in Toronto, which is why we said futurist, because the whole idea around this this master's program that she's in is that after the fact, she'll be able to call herself a futurist.
And if you don't know what a futurist is or does, we get into that because I didn't know. So hopefully it'll explain it.
Yeah, and she's focusing on a human-centered approach to design, strategy, and innovation, and researching future topics around specifically Web3, social media, the creator economy, and more. So it's all super relevant to many of you who listen regularly.
Yeah, it's a really good one. So I'm excited about sharing it with everyone.
Let's stop talking about it and just get into it.
Sounds good.
Alyssa, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yes, we're excited. And the reason I say welcome back is obviously you've been a guest before, which may not be obvious to all of our listeners. So before we get you to just kind of reiterate how you got into your field now, I want to specify that we had Alyssa on the podcast in season 3 episode 4, and it was a highlight for us. So that's why we have her back. But if you want to scroll back and listen to it to get a little bit more context to this interview, then you can look for it. It was last February 2021, and it was called The Enduring Power of Creativity. But Alyssa, we're pumped. Could you, for those who haven't yet heard season 3, episode 4, could you just rewind a little bit and set the stage for where you're at now in your career?
Yeah, for sure. So I am a graphic designer and art director and have experience in boutique design studios and agencies. But I have been self-employed for the past 10 years, working on my own creative practice. From there, I went about 3 years ago, decided to go back to school, to grad school, just to expand my practice and add more to what I've already been doing. And I didn't want to go back just to do like a master's of design. I wanted to do something that would add on to it. And I've always been really fascinated with trends and future thinking and sort of what is coming next. And so I found this program in Toronto through OCAD U, and it's called the Strategic Foresight Innovation. I can't even say it, but it's a design thinking master's, basically. So it's specializing in design thinking, systems thinking, and futures thinking. So yes, that's kind of what I'm doing. And really, I loved that at the end of the program, I could potentially be called a futurist. So that's sort of how they got me. And
love that.
Yeah, and that's where I am now, I guess.
Yeah, the harder it is to say, the more legit it is, I heard.
Right?
Can you explain a little bit? I know. Can you explain a little bit more about what a futurist does? Like, we've got a sense of what you're studying as far as like looking into the future and trend casting and stuff. But practically, once the degree is done, how does that translate into the work that you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, so it is a newer field. So not everyone's doing it. There's a lot of larger corporations having like innovation hubs and different things like that. And that's a lot of the time where futurists would go into. But in general, like what the type of person that makes like a really good futurist is someone that's really curious, someone that's like watching, someone that's interested and listening and observing. And they're really interested in the future and how that will impact our present. So futurists aren't predicting the future. So that's something that's really important to like have that distinction. They're not psychics. They're not like reading like anyone's palms or anything to figure it out, but instead they're like, we're uncovering possibilities. So there's this really great systems thinker that we learned about in school, Donella Meadows. She writes this awesome book that is called Thinking in Systems. And she talks about how the future can't be predicted, but it can be envisioned and brought lovingly into being. I just really love that idea that there can actually be multiple futures and that we're just trying to kind of uncover what those are. So we, as we keep moving into the future, we can kind of start pivoting and seeing and changing to like react, I guess, or understand what we need to do. If like the world is going more in this direction or this direction, we already kind of have a sense of how we can create and design and solve problems in those spaces.
I think that's so interesting. And the first time like you walked us through what that looks like, it just like kind of blew my mind. And I think from my perspective, when I think about like the internet and marketing and things like that and applying some of the things that you're learning to those fields, there's so many possibilities. But then if you apply those things to things like, I don't know, like the legal system or politics or like, I don't know, environmental studies, like there's so many routes that could go. Is what you're learning, like, do you like dive into a certain subject matter and focus some of that thinking or focus on applying it to a certain industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as in school, especially, we've kind of been able to like follow our curiosity. A lot of times we're thinking about wicked problems, which are like really big problems that are hard to necessarily problem solve. So it could be like, housing crisis or food insecurity, like those like really big problems. But but then we also are like looking at even smaller lenses. So for instance, I did some of my work around like the creator economy or the digital gig economy, which was a lot about like precarious work. So that was like the big, maybe larger problem was precarious work. And then we really like dug into sort of what that looks like for the digital gig worker. So really you can apply this to like any industry. It's really how you niche maybe, or like how you, like what you're interested in, because so much of futures thinking is like scanning and pinpointing signals and looking for patterns. And so you're always having to be like interested in like looking around things and not just siloing into like one space. But at the same time, there's definitely things that you're like more drawn to or like have more expertise and knowledge in.
Totally. We're obviously most interested in marketing and creative, and I know we have that in common. So as you've been learning this, even though it's applied to different industries and different types of problems, how have you started to envision it in marketing, and even to make it even more practical? Like, how would you describe a trend or trend casting or scanning in the context of marketing or creative?
Right. Yeah. So like when we're looking at like marketing and social media, like trends, I think, so trends as a definition is something that is developing or changing. So a trend always has movement. So there can be like really big trends like mega trends or macro trends that are happening on a longer time span. But then there's also those micro trends, or even in like social media marketing, I think a lot of things that we think or say are trends are maybe more fads even, because they're just happening so quickly. So when we're looking at marketing in terms of like social media and marketing, trend can often, it happens really fast, and there's like, it'll gain popularity, like we all know, for a limited time and then can die. But even when you look at that, like that can almost be a signal, like all of those fads, when you put them together, or those micro trends, that can show maybe a larger trend that's actually happening. So I was like trying to think about this too, like, for instance, those little miss things that are those memes that are all over the place right now, those are definitely dying. I'm sure, like I feel like they're right at the peak and ready to die, but it's starting, I feel like it's maybe signaling something else. Like you look at that, and then there was like the American Girl doll one, and the way we always want to, talk about our star signs or like Enneagram lists, and we're all just really trying to like categorize and put each other to understand what groups we are. So maybe that trend is actually like acceleration or like increased desire for belonging, or
Totally.
acceleration of bonding through nostalgia, because like the Little Miss and American Dolls. So things like that, like those smaller trends can actually be signals, or those trends that are maybe more just trending can be signals for things that are actually happening, like in terms of behavior on the platforms. So that's like kind of what excites me. Things are happening so fast, but if we can kind of like pull back and start to see the patterns, I think the whole idea is that we can then get ahead of them and start to understand, like, how could we bring the next thing to the table that can get people excited.
Yeah, that's where my head went too. Like knowing that, and knowing, like that it's a signal to something larger. Like, is that kind of where your role as a futurist kind of like lives in terms of like advising on next? Or like, how do you take, if you know that, if you have that knowledge, like how do you take that to be able to like, hopefully, because everyone wants to be at the front edge of a trend. Everyone wants to be like the first ones out with it, And so like, is it possible to almost like reverse engineer a trend in a way where you're like, we know that these are signals to a larger desire from, society at large? Like, how can we maneuver something to go viral or to be trending?
Yeah, well, I think it's a lot of times like putting multiple trends together and then seeing like what happens. So if, say, X trend, Y trend are come together and both accelerate, then there's probably like opportunity there for like innovation to happen. So that's to the role of, I guess, even just futures thinking in general, is like looking at the trends and seeing what happens when they come together. Say this trend decelerates, this trend accelerates, or they both accelerate, or they both decelerate, and starting to strategize, like create strategy around that, where, okay, if this happens, we're going to do X. And then if this happens, we're going to do Y, and being able to be a bit more like being able to plan for the future, because you're starting to say, okay, if these trends continue, then we know what to do. Or if they don't continue, we know what to do. Either way, our strategy is robust enough and I guess resilient enough to not be, or like to be able to change and pivot with the trends. I'm not sure if I answered that question exactly, but I think it's hard. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think so. I'm just curious, maybe for clarity for our listeners, what you mean by accelerate or decelerate when you bring trends together. Like, what does that look like in real life?
So like maybe the trend around, I'm just trying to think, digital burnout. So that trend right now might be accelerating. So how are you, as if that's an important trend for like the industry you're in, how is that going to maybe impact the strategy that you're bringing to your clients, or even your own personal strategy? And then, but if it like is decelerating and people are more online, because it's also like looking at them and then how are people reacting to that? Like, what is the behavior from that trend? So if digital burnout is happening, people are maybe leaving the platforms. They're maybe not being online as much. Maybe there's like mental health crisis added in there. Like, how are we going to, what are we going to do if no one's on the platforms anymore? Like, how are we going to reach them? That kind of thing. Or, yeah, and then you can look at other things. Like, I'm just trying to think of some of the trends that I've worked on, like deplatforming or like kidpreneurs or different things like that. So if like, things are accelerating with deplatforming, so we need to like be careful maybe with our voice and like how we're showing up online, different things like that. But if it's like not decelerating, which would mean it's probably not a trend. Sometimes it would be not a trend that you would then need to worry about.
Okay, so it's kind of like, is it early in its growth or adoption, or is it late? That's like the difference between accelerating and decelerating? Okay.
Yeah, because cool. A trend is always moving, whether it's moving, it's like leaving, I guess, the trend, like the space, or it's, accelerating. And sometimes it's a trend, like it's also over time. So like there's early trends, and then like the mega trends are around for a really long time, and they're like really important. So even like social media at the beginning was even more of a fad or a micro trend, and now it would be a mega trend or even a driver, as it impacts like everything.
Yeah, that's super interesting. What can you help us understand? Like, what is trend scanning? Like, I think we can all, when you mention certain things, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that would be a trend. Like the digital, whatever you just said, like burnout.
Digital burnout.
I would never kind of categorize that as a trend, but you would. So like, how does trend scanning work?
Yeah, totally. So basically you also look at, so you first look at like the industry, or for say a client you might have, maybe they're in the restaurant industry, or so you look at some sort of industry. So you have a bit of a landscape, I guess, or like a sandbox to play in. So you're not looking at everything. And then scanning really, for trend scanning, really just means you're looking at everything. Like you're reading articles, you're reading journals, you're reading news articles, watching the news, watching movies, Twitter, like really anywhere, even out in the real world, like everything you can be kind of scanning and pulling signals. And as you're starting to see things come together, you usually pull between 3 to 5 signals per trend, and that sort of validates that that trend and shows that, yes, it is an actual thing because there's like data behind it, or it's popping up in many different places. And then to do like a holistic trend scan, there's different frameworks that people use, but I was taught to use like the steep V, which just means that you're looking at like signals and trends in like 5 or 6 different areas. So it's like social, technology, environmental, economic, political, and values. And basically what that means is you're just having a broader view of everything. So you're not just only focusing on tech trends in the restaurant industry. You're also looking at social trends and maybe environmental trends that maybe that will impact like their takeout, I don't know, delivery or different things like that. Or like even political trends, like all of a sudden there's no Uber or Uber Eats because the government shut it down or whatever. Like maybe there's some trends even in policy that will impact the restaurant industry. And so then when you have like this full view of that landscape, you can kind of start to see what's happening and like where things could go and what to watch. And it's really exciting to be doing this for like marketing, because then you can also be bringing this to clients and being like, these are, the 5 trends that you really need to be watching. And this is why we're doing this strategy. And this is, what we're bringing to the table. And it just like validates and gives you authority into like what's happening in the world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think especially in marketing, because as you alluded to earlier, they're happening fast. Yeah, but also I think brands and marketers are reacting to them when they're likely already almost at the point of decelerating, like coming back to that topic as well, right? Like it's almost too late now. So it almost feels like a flash in the pan. But if, like you're saying, if you can be more systematic and broad about it to better understand the bigger picture, then there's more of a likelihood that if you tap into one of those trends, that there's a longer shelf life on it. But also too, like, especially in my head, as you're talking, I'm thinking, okay, if I have a broader understanding of a trend that has a longer lifespan potential, then I could potentially even like align one of my brand values or like a characteristic of my product with an element of that, and build something bigger and more sustainable, but still on trend, if that makes sense.
It's almost like future proofing.
Yeah.
Like you're
That's
being
100%
more proactive than reactive.
Yeah.
Are we tracking?
Exactly.
Is that in the right direction? Okay.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what it is. Like essentially that is why you would want to work with someone that's future thinking, or like even just have that a part of your practice, whether you have like an actual futurist or you just have that a part. It for sure is all about future proofing. So that's awesome.
Cool. So for like marketers who might not have the luxury of like access to you or to a futurist, like how can they almost apply like a micro version of this thinking to their own strategies, whether they like work in-house or an agency? Like I think we're all watching, or I guess the burden of watching everything, at least online, I think a lot of marketers take that on and they're, doing the best they can. But is there ways that they can be better with, their time and what they're paying attention to so that they can be better equipped to like look at trends?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like a lot of it comes down to like organization and process. So having somewhere where you can start just, documenting the things that you're seeing and the things that are sort of bubbling to the surface for you. I think that is almost half the battle, is just having maybe like an Excel spreadsheet or like Notion or something just to start like putting some things in that you're starting to see. I think that is if you want to be like coming to the table with actual trends that you're like developing. But the beauty too of the internet is there's so many trend reports out there right now, and things that you could even be sort of dabbling in right now and seeing some of those like broader trends more on maybe like behavior on the platforms you're using or behavior in the audience that you're targeting, and then sort of bumping up your strategies against those trends and seeing if your strategies are in line, if they will be resilient if those trends like really take off or if they don't. So I think that would be like, that's something that we do. It's called wind tunneling, which is like, anyway, it can get a little bit complicated, but basically what you do is you just like run your strategies through the trends and see if they, you know, if this trend really takes off, will my strategy still be relevant? And that's, you know, if you took like 3 to 5 trends and just sort of look at your strategies through that lens, will they be relevant? And if they will, then you have like a really great strategy.
Interesting. I would love to see that in real life. Like, what does that process actually look like? We don't have to get into it right now, but I'm curious if you have a favorite like trend report that you see come out on a regular basis, whether it's annual or whatever, because I know there's a lot out there.
Yeah. I don't know. I was really excited. I think YouTube just did one that was like really fun, which is cool just to see. Even it's sometimes nice too to get them where they sort of validate the things that you're already seeing too. So that's something, I don't know, that's a game you could play, is just like thinking about the things that you're seeing and then see if they like are, you know, if like the larger platforms, when they bring out their trend reports, if they're also seeing them. Like that's starting to show that you're maybe what you're scanning to is sort of relevant as well. Like the Gartner does a lot of trend reports, which I really like. And they have something too that's called, which I was going to mention as well. It's called the hype cycle, which is another really cool thing. I can't necessarily explain it, but it's this thing that talks about like technology and trends and sort of like the point of innovation to adoption. And it's something I think is, really can be really useful, and just seeing where you are in like that hype cycle, and if you're able to like, if you know the tech or even the behavior, if it's going to continue or if it's going to kind of die off as well.
Are there any, like, for example, in that YouTube trend report, were there things in that report that you were kind of already tracking?
I can't remember exactly, but there was something around like the nostalgia. I'm not sure, the exact wording that they had, but I've really been noticing lately. I mean, nostalgia is always such a powerful tool, but I really feel like, I think it's maybe like the pandemic and even the disconnect we're feeling, all the huge world issues, like there's like this comfort that we need. Oh yeah, maybe it was like comfort marketing or something they were talking about.
Yeah, comfort influencers.
And so I feel like that nostalgia angle has been really like top of mind to me. And even just like the idea, because I've been really interested in nostalgia, I've been reading up on it and how nostalgia is not even necessarily things that you remember or experienced. It's like this wish that you had experienced them, which I think is really like this longing to experience it, which is like really interesting in terms of marketing. Like capitalizing, I guess, on that is fascinating to me.
Yeah. So it doesn't mean that like if you're in the nostalgia like trend or creating content or strategy around it, that you're necessarily expecting all of your audience or your customers to relate on a personal level, but more as like a theme. Like, for example, I saw Paris Hilton's coming out with like a whole new Juicy Couture collection, which is like so 2000s and makes so much sense for her because she pretty much invented the jumpsuit. And that's obviously like riding that nostalgia wave and like the Y2K kind of like trend. So it's like maybe I didn't wear or own a jumpsuit the way Paris Hilton wore and owned one in the 2000s, but I can totally relate to that and it's working for me, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's really powerful.
How do you know, like, as a marketer, like, if, say, I was in, like, the room with Juicy Couture and I was like, this is the time to do it. We got to bring Paris back to bring this collection to life. Like, how do you know if it's too late? Like, obviously, you know, the logistical side of my brain's like, there's so much, like, planning and campaign shoots and all that stuff. Like, if you're seeing something and you're seeing these signals and you can identify it and think strategically about it, when is it too late to jump into like a trend that you're hoping to like action on?
I don't even know if I can answer that. That's so hard. I feel like there's a lot of like gut in that. There's a lot of like trusting, the people around you, or like even, I think when you're scanning things and seeing like trends as a whole, like, I don't even know. Actually, I don't know. That
That's
one.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's all just a gamble.
Morgan, you can cut that off. Yeah.
Don't be.
But I mean, like,
I just took that whole question out.
that's so hard.
Yeah, and maybe there isn't an answer to that. Like maybe it's like you don't really know. Like I mean, even as marketers, like a lot of it is instinct based, gut based. It's like even you can have like the research in place and like the signals in place, and you don't even always know if like the timing is just so hard to get that right. So I'd say like that's a variable in just like in the industry at large. So it's not like a do it now or else, you know?
Yeah. I think there's so many different factors you like weigh, like you need to weigh against that, like seeing how long, like the Y2K thing. But like there's so much about like Paris Hilton, and like fandoms are so big right now, and like celebrity brand lines or whatever, like, right? Like Hailey Bieber. And
there's layers to that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much. So it's like that would be like the perfect timing. And I mean, I think with everything, there's always risk involved as well, right? Like clearly they took the risk. Like Juicy Couture like is ready to take that risk, whether it bombs or not. And I mean, I feel like everyone would be so excited for it. And like even pandemic, like everyone was in sweatsuits and tie-dye sweatsuits.
Totally.
So it almost does feel like, I mean, maybe it might be slightly late, but also it might be like right on time. Like we need that velour sweatsuit now.
Yeah,
Bring back the velour.
There's other factors too, like celebrity, like star power, and just the ability to make something exciting, even if it's not necessarily at the peak or like the upward curve of the trend, you know, and also seasonality, like coming towards fall, you know, obviously like a velour tracksuit is great for the fall. I feel like tonal outfits, you know, like those are still on trend. So
and you want to be seen in your tracksuit now, like the way they wore them in the 2000s. It was like tight and low rise is coming back now. So it's the layered question for sure.
So many things,
This might be a little bit on the nose, but I'm just curious if you would say it's become easier these days or harder to follow trends compared to in the past.
Yeah, I think it's overwhelming, but I think it probably is easier to spot them just because of like all the information. I mean, it might also be like, again, overwhelming because there's so many things coming at you. And so like having to like pinpoint the signals and like make the patterns come together. But again, I think if your like process is constantly like scanning, then I think it's probably a bit easier right now. What do you think?
Nice. Yeah, I feel like I would have said the same thing.
I would have said the same thing, but my assumption is that like social media is a big driver of trends. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, 100. Yeah, definitely.
So like what's trending on social media or even like trending platforms is likely like what's going to influence the next trends.
Yeah. And even that platform like amplifies things, brings things, like gives people, like sort of highlights things or allows things that probably wouldn't have been popular. Not like if we didn't have social media and we weren't constantly sharing and like showing our lives and influencing each other, would probably may not take off or be as interesting to people.
Yeah. Would you say that? I'm just kind of thinking about this as we talk, but I would agree that social is like a trend starter in a lot of contexts, but I also feel like maybe in some contexts, and you might have just said this in other words, so I'm sorry if I'm just like regurgitating it, but I feel like sometimes maybe it doesn't start with social media, but social is an amplifier for it. And maybe those are the trends that are more worth getting onto because they transcend social media. Would you say that's the case? Like, is there more longevity to trends that happen outside of social, but just get kind of like, but social just acts as more of a catalyst?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. There's some of the things I think that are happening on social are more fads, aren't necessarily trends. And like
Right.
social media is maybe more the catalyst, the driver, it's like the platform that things can be shown on. And then, and that's the beauty of trends. Like there's so many different kinds. There's ones that are like more overarching, like societal behavior based. And then there's the smaller ones that could potentially like impact behaviors. But right now it's something small that we a lot of people probably don't even pay attention to, just think it's kind of fun. And then all of a sudden that's like impacting how we relate to each other or how the world, even like worldview or whatever, all those different things. But it's like, it can just get bigger and bigger and bigger.
An interesting question, and I'm curious to hear your answer, would be, do you think it's possible to grow or to like get traction on social or just online and in marketing in general without being involved in trends? Or is like participation in trends the only way for people to get attention from people?
Yeah. So I have been thinking about this question. And I would love to hear what both of you think too, as well. But I think you can follow trends and you can attract and grow from that. I think that is a great strategy to be following trends, jumping on things. But I think long term, if you can't move from like that follow mindset to more of an anticipatory mindset of what is next, then you may become irrelevant. Someone may jump ahead of you. You may just always be on the coattails or always trying to like be, doing what's next. And I think that can definitely grow. But I do think long term, it's like finding out who you are, what your brand is, like, what am I going to lead and innovate will allow for like more longevity. But I think every brand and business is attaching themselves to trends. Like that's the way you learn and change and grow.
Totally. And I think a lot of brands and businesses need to understand trends before they even begin a business. Like, I feel like it's 100%. Almost like it's less about like a marketing tool and more about like understanding the market and understanding before you enter it. Like, what is the value prop you're offering here? And does the market even want it at this moment in time? And like, why are you entering and bringing this product or service to life right now? Like, it's almost like you have to like do that work before you even approach marketing.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. This is like such important work. And I think where you will then, if you do this work before you even like launch something, you'll understand the market, you'll understand where it's going. You'll even be able to pinpoint, your value prop, like how you're going to bring something different or even answer those things that are happening and how you can anticipate that. So I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like it's also coming back to your point of like the difference between trends and fads, because if you're just being reactive to fads constantly, that's not going to be true to any type of brand. That's just going to be trying to be everything in a way, But if you have done the work before starting the business and launching your social or your content flow in general, then you can actually be selective about what trends that you participate in to make sure that they're the ones that are true to who you are as a business or as a brand. And then it feels authentic rather than just reactive.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
One thing that like this whole conversation is just like blowing my mind. And I think it's so interesting. But one thing that really intimidates me is when you factor in technology, because that's where I feel like I'm going to be left behind. Like conversations around blockchain and crypto and like all that stuff. And you know, the platform stuff I feel like is much more approachable. Like, yes, I can like nerd out on like how TikTok is changing its algorithm all the time. But in terms of like the other technology side, or even like what's what's that term for like that weird like outer layer of the internet? Not the metaverse,
Web3?
like, yeah, Web3.
Oh yeah, Web3.
Yeah, that's I'm out of here. Like that's where I'm definitely not able to keep up. Like how much like it's hard to talk about the future of marketing or even like trend forecasting without keeping technology in mind. Like how much of that how much are you thinking about technology when it comes to like even approaching all of this like trend forecasting?
Yeah, so I'm super interested in it. I am trying to keep up with it and understand what is happening. Yeah, like Web3 and blockchain and NFTs and DAOs and all those things. I'm jumping into that, just trying to understand what's happening. But I feel like there's themes that are coming out. Like Web3 is still a new frontier. There's still so much that will change. It's not the end. And even we're in this point of like, there's Web 1 and Web 2, and now we're potentially moving into Web 3, or we're there, or it's coming. But there was also like that learning curve from Web 1 to Web 2. And we did it. Like we did jump into it, and it was slow. So I'm trying to like not be as intimidated by it. But there are these things that are coming out. So like Web 3 is really, really focused on community. So like right now, while you're maybe more focused on Web 2, there's things that you can be thinking about, like, how can I be fostering community right now? That maybe it'll translate into Web3, maybe not, like who knows what is happening, but there's some of these, I guess, like tenets, you might say, of like the next iteration that you can even start thinking about right now, even if you're not jumping into that space. I think community in general is such a huge topic. At least I'm noticing that right now. And there's lots of creators that are pulling together communities, like even offline or on WhatsApp chats or like Substack or even Facebook groups, different things like that, which I think is really exciting and just helps maybe you're able to like jump into the new wave a bit easier.
Yeah, that definitely seems a bit more approachable to me than like unpacking that whole like Web3 as a concept too. When it comes to like diving into some of these topics, like are there any signals to you that help you understand like this is worthy of me diving in? Like you mentioned that it can be pretty exhausting to be reading all of everything and watching everything. Like are there things that you watch for that maybe help you identify like this is not worth my investment and time in? Like I don't need to like be an expert here, but like maybe there's like signals that show that it's like downtrending, or like maybe it's like, oh, this is just hype and not really something that has a bunch of legs that's gonna, you know, keep moving forward in the next 6 months. Like are there any things that help you identify what's worth your time?
Well, I mean, this is kind of even maybe speaking back to that previous episode I was on, but I really am all about following my curiosity. Like my brain is always moving to the next thing. And so I sort of trust my interest in things as well. I think that is maybe for so many people, like if you're not into it, you're not going to learn it as well, or you're not, if it's like an extra thing you're just adding on, but you're not actually into it, then, you know, you can do it as much as you want, but it's just not going to probably bring like the fruit that you're wanting to bring. So I definitely like trust my gut a lot. And even with like Web3 stuff, I've been learning about it for the last 2 years, like have been sort of dabbling in it. And I'm only now getting more in it because I've just been slowly watching it. And now I just feel like, yeah, I'm ready to sort of dive into it a bit more. But it's been just like, you know, constantly just like, hey, it keeps coming up. It keeps coming up in conversation. I keep, you know, seeing it on Twitter more and more, or listening to it on a podcast, it just seems to be coming up more and more in conversation. And I think that's where that starts to like pique my interest. Like, why is that? What is happening? And that's even when I was saying like community, like that's just starting to be like, oh, this is really interesting. It's about Web3, but like, what is it trying to solve? Like, why is it coming now? And then even just seeing that, like, it's trying to solve problems of big tech and ownership and data. And so that's like really interesting to me, is like, what is it actually trying to solve? And then if it feels like it seems like relevant, then I want to dive and learn a bit more about it.
I think that's a great observation. I feel like the terms used around Web3 are, I don't know if they're like meant to be elitist, but I feel like they're intimidating by nature. And
100%.
And when you talk about it at a high level, it's just this grandiose thing that no one can possibly understand. And that's why everyone is just kind of like typically shying away from it. But then the people that I think are boiling it down to something actually quite simple, like community, for example, or just like as simple as translating art into like a digital context with NFTs, they're like seeing huge growth and like developing new relationships and even like making way more money than they've ever made before. And so I feel like that's what you're alluding to, and what I feel like has given me any sort of confidence talking about it is when I really just boil it down to like simple characteristics that are part of its makeup. Because like when you say something like the metaverse, you just naturally think about like a Doctor Strange movie in the multiverse and how like mind-boggling that whole cinematic experience is, and like how can I possibly understand the internet in that context, you know? So but if you simplify it to something like community, or even just processing like funds in a secure, like decentralized way through like a digital wallet, you know, like you can wrap your head around that in a singular sort of like format. I don't know if that.
So there
helps,
needs to be
Missy.
a resource that like dumbs it down for me.
Yeah.
Like, cause
maybe a podcast.
Oh yeah. Like maybe that's what we need.
Yeah. Well, and that is one of the things I'm noticing as I'm doing more and more research, is that there's not accessible entry points for normies, I guess is what they call us, for like non-technical people. It's really hard. It feels completely overwhelming. But sometimes I've talked to like my parents who went from like, you know, no internet to internet. And I feel like just even talking to people like that, like I can't imagine that mindset shift. And I think so much of when I talk to my parents who definitely jumped on and wanted to be a part of that, were one of their first who like got the internet of their friends and had the computer and all that. It's just that curiosity, that like just wanting to jump in and try. And I think that we just need to like find more of those accessible ways to also be able to like feel like we can jump in, we can try, we can test this out, so it doesn't feel so overwhelming, because it for sure does. But hopefully that will change.
And permission to just like chase what you're curious about. Like I can just go down the rabbit hole of like Y2K fashion and Paris Hilton and celebrities. I don't need to be like the blockchain expert.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the best part, is like niching into what you love, and then people want to, you know, talk to you about that, and that you don't have to talk about everything.
Totally. Are there any brands that you're seeing that are doing a really good job at incorporating trends, or who seem like more trend forward or like on the edge of the trends?
Yeah, this was a really hard question for me. And for some reason I was like really drawing a blank. I was more thinking about some of the brands that like I'm really frustrated with right now, but I won't talk about those. But there's some things like
Tell us offline.
Yeah. But okay, so this might not even be like cool to talk about anymore by the time this podcast goes out, but like Be Real, that new photo sharing app platform. And I feel like they've locked into the trends of like authenticity and even like addiction, how you can only post one thing once a day. They tell you when you can do that. And there's just not this desire, like, or they're, at least as of right now, they're not really like feeding that addiction mindset. So I was thinking like, that's really interesting that that's kind of come out and people seem to be like jumping in on it. But then there's lots of speculation that it's like on the way out, but who knows? I feel like I'm seeing more and more of my friends jumping onto it. then I was thinking about, well, we kind of talked about like nostalgia. So like Stranger Things, that whole phenomenon about how they're like pulling on nostalgia, and like Gen Z who never even grew up in the 80s, but they're like, everyone's loving that. And like Kate Bush is all of a sudden number one again. And that whole like phenomenon of that, this is really cool. I mean, like Netflix needed something. So that's really nice. And yeah, are there any that you're seeing or like people that you're really excited about?
Well, I was going to staple on kind of a follow-up question to this. And it's just, as you're talking about brands, I was thinking about like Yeezy, for example, like Kanye West. I'm curious from your perspective, if you think that Kanye and his team are really good at trend scanning and like understanding the bigger picture and releasing products that align with that, or do you think that a brand or a celebrity like that is more so just picking things that they like and releasing them and creating trends because they have that kind of influence?
I feel like I mean, he's a genius for sure. And like, he has an incredible team. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is like future thinking on this team, but I do think he just has this power of like being Kanye, to anything he posts sort of like sells out right away. So I don't know. I mean, because some of the stuff is like, what? Like, that is just a sweatshirt, right? Like, and I mean, it's like everyone loves basics, but yeah, I feel like there's like, it's hard with celebrity because even some of that, I think they're definitely capitalizing on what is trendy or like what, but they're also creating that through like their hype and just like having that fandom. Like fandoms right now are that's so huge and so powerful. And so they can like really do anything. And then they just like automatically make it trending, whether it like, I guess it propels and creates a trend. And then people are trying to jump onto that. And then more and more things, more and more donut glazed skin is happening in the world. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that either. But I also just noticed, like with Kanye specifically, how like he's doing a lot with other brands too. Like he's kind of aligning with Balenciaga, or he's like partnering with Gap or things like that.
Yes.
So, and Adidas, obviously. So, and I feel like even with Adidas, with his shoes, like a lot of the silhouettes were similar to existing Adidas silhouettes, but just with more of like a different angle or a touch. So yeah, I'd be curious to see behind that curtain for sure.
I feel like it's got to be somewhat intentional, just because the more like you dive into like celebrities, the more you like realize how much of a machine actually exists behind what they try to make you think is just natural taste.
Yeah, and if it was just him independently, then like he can take whatever risks he wants to take. But if he's working with a brand, an established like legacy brand like Balenciaga or Gap or Adidas, like there's got to be some sort of like hedged risk for those brands where they understand that there's a likelihood of demand here, So that's where I'm wondering if it's actually less genius or brilliance on an individual's part and more of like a team like really understanding the bigger picture. But we'll never know until we know.
Yeah, and that's the whole reason I think he was brought into Gap, was to like give them new life and make them maybe be relevant again.
Yeah, and wasn't it like the first place he worked? Like I'm pretty sure he like worked at a Gap before he was famous. So like that's part of his like story too.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
So what a lot of our listeners probably don't know is that you actually work with us at Arcade as in a creative director capacity. So one of the questions we wanted to ask is, how does this all tie into that? Like, how do you look through this filter of futurism and like trend scanning and understanding the bigger picture, what's happening across industries in your work as a creative director?
Yeah, well, it's been so great working with you and all your team. It's been amazing. I think like the way that I'm coming to the director role is even more like systems thinking too. Like that's so much also about future thinking, is seeing how everything's connected and how, yeah, kind of taking more of a bird's eye view and just like seeing how everything connects together. So that's definitely how I've been approaching it initially. But then my hope is to bring some more future thinking into even just like the arcade brand as a whole. If we can start thinking about like, you know, what is the social team even seeing in terms of brand or in terms of trends, and then maybe developing like, you know, the arcade future set of trends or whatever it might be, but just like thinking about those in terms of strategy, I think would be really cool. Just understanding more about like what your audience is drawn to, their behaviors, and like how the world is moving is so important as we create, and being able to look like see our, you know, visual strategy and digital strategy and seeing how it's going to move through those trends, I think will be really powerful just in like creating resilient and like authoritative strategies that we can bring to clients. It's really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And send it through a wind tunnel, see what happens.
Yeah. I'll show you next time I'm in the office. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good.
I'll bring that.
Yeah, this stuff is really exciting to me because it just feels like it's much more than just trying to sell products or much more than just like trying to make a client some money. It's more about like, what's the stamp that you're going to leave at this point in time on, you know, people and the internet. So we're super excited to be working with you on this, and like it's already brought so much value to our teams and to us. So it's been so fun, and we're excited to do more together. We're getting to the end of our interview here, but we like to ask all of our guests 2 questions. The first one is, what's the best piece of advice that you've been given?
Again, this is so hard, but I just went for dinner with a couple of colleagues, and we were talking, and one of them, so right now I'm working on my master's thesis project, and it's like this really big research project that is over like a year, and it's a lot of work over a long period of time. And their advice to me, which I thought was so great, was and I think that ties so well in with like the future thinking and even for all of us, but they said to me, create with the end in mind, which I felt was just so cool. It speaks to like the future state of things, and just thinking about your hypothesis, what you think, and even if things change, at least you're always like creating with the end in mind, and you can always switch and pivot, but at least you're not just like creating and you don't even know where you're going. So that was powerful to me.
Totally. I think that's powerful in our context, and many of our listeners even just thinking about social media, because you can be so reactive. It's just like so in the moment that often you lose the bigger picture or whatever the end goal is, just for the sake of like engagement or virality or like experimentation, when really it needs to be part of like a broader picture. So that's really powerful. The second question that we always like to ask, and I know you've answered this one once before, but today, in this moment, who do you feel is making waves online and why?
Yeah, so
I'd also like to add a question to that.
Okay.
As you answer, like, because you're likely reading and watching so many things. Are there resources that you can share too for people who are interested in this topic?
Yeah, for sure. So, there's this book called How to Future that I would like highly recommend. It's actually like a really easy book to read. It's like done in a very like everyday language. It's not just for like futurists or like academia, by Scott Smith. That's like a really great book if you want to just like jump into this, learn a bit more. That Danella Meadows book on systems thinking is just so important for like anyone, because systems thinking is so important in like every industry. So that would be another one. But in general, like I listen to a lot of podcasts, and my Twitter feed is like a huge point of, I don't know, like just sort of scanning. I try to follow a very diverse and wide range of people, not just everyone that I like necessarily agree with or even industries, like, because too, like I'm doing research in the Web3 world, and it can be a bit tech bro, and I'm not like super into that, but I want to like hear what everyone's saying, even if I can't relate to all of it. So I guess even just follow me on Twitter, and and you can like look or just check out who I'm following there is helpful as well. Probably, I really like the podcast ICYMI. It's like just really fun, but also kind of talks about like what's happening, especially with like internet culture. And I really like that one. It comes out twice a week, and they just kind of talk about the things that are actually trending online and how that impacts us as well in like a really fun way. Yeah, they'd probably be who I would say is making waves. I really like them.
Nice. Gonna check that out for sure. We'll have that in the show notes. And I'm definitely, I was making a mental note that I should go check out who you're following on Twitter and poach some of those for my own Twitter feed. But
honestly, that's the key. Sorry. That is the key. Like, even just looking at anyone who they're following, like if you're like, oh, this person's really interesting or doing interesting things, like go to where they are on social and like look through their follower list, because so much of that, you can find so many cool people that way.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Where can people connect with you after this?
Yeah, probably through Instagram at Alyssa Yuhas, or on my Twitter, which is also, both. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Alyssa, this was good. Good round 2 to having you as a guest on the Wave Social podcast. So thank you. And we're really looking forward to releasing this one. I think it's packed full of goodness.
Sweet. Thank you so much for having me. This was such a great conversation.